And now the second of the 8 sufferings is what we call suffering of old age. Imagine if you're able to live through your young days safe and sound. But there has to be one day when you are going to get old. And as you get old, your body and your mind will start to decline. And as you get old, you start to lose your friends. Maybe your friends could die one by one, and you have to suffer by sending them off, by having to see them leave you behind. And therefore this will all cause you suffering. And now the third type of the 8 sufferings is what we call suffering of illness. Basically, we all want to be healthy. We want to be free from the pains that are caused by illness. But it is not possible because illness is inevitable in our lives. And at some time, we must suffer from the pain and humiliation of illness. For example, for some types of illness, they could attack your body, make parts of your body deteriorate. And in that process, of course, you will feel a lot of pain and suffering. Or that when you get too sick, you are not even able to move your own body around freely. Then you would have to depend on other people to help you get to the toilet. And you have to depend on other people to feed you or even give you a shower. And this will cause you humiliation because you probably won't be able to accept the fact that you cannot even get such simple daily tasks done by yourself. So this would be a form of suffering. And now the fourth type of the 8 sufferings is what we call suffering of death. Once again, no matter how well we live our lives, death will be eventual. And death could either happen suddenly or frighteningly. It could even happen slowly and painfully. In front of death, we are all like leaves blown in the wind, and none of us will know what tomorrow is going to be like. Therefore, just the fact of death itself will cause us a lot of suffering. Now the fifth of the 8 suffering is what we call suffering of lost love, or when we lose our beloved ones. Imagine there's someone whom you really love in your life. It could be your lifetime partner, or your friend, or your parents, or other members of your family whom you love very much. And imagine if they were to be gone, or they were to die, or that they stop loving you in return. All of this will cause you suffering. So basically, suffering comes from not being able to be with the ones whom we love. This is what we call suffering of lost love. Okay, now the 6th type of the 8 sufferings is the suffering of being hated, or suffering of being stuck with the people whom you hate. Either of these will cause you a lot of suffering. As none of us would actually want enemies, but sometimes it is extremely hard for us to avoid enemies. It's extremely hard for us to be totally free from people who may hate us, or to be free from people whom we may hate. And when we were stuck with them, just by looking at them gives you really annoyed feelings. Or just by hearing their voices, you will feel very uncomfortable. So all of this becomes suffering of being hated, or suffering of being stuck with the people whom you hate. And now the 7th of the 8 suffering is what we call suffering of unfulfilled desires. And another truth which the Buddha taught us in life is that human beings are full of desires because they spend so much effort into grabbing onto something which they regard as real, but is in fact empty in nature. And so as we continue to try and fulfill our desires, it could cause us trouble. And as our desire causes us to grasp onto all these unreal things, that will stop us from understanding the Dharma. And furthermore, when the desire is not being fulfilled, they hurt us once again. So imagine there's something which you really want. Think about a thing that you have seen in a shop or have been thinking about for a very long time. You've thought about buying a new laptop, but you just can't afford it. But you want it so badly. Imagine that feeling. This is the type of suffering which unfulfilled desire could cause you. And now the final of the 8 sufferings is what we call suffering of the 5 skandhas. The skandhas consist of form, sensation, perception, activity, and consciousness. And these are the building blocks of conscious existence and what actually causes suffering. In other words, the 5 skandhas are like an unlimited source of fuel that produce pain and suffering life after life. And in order to understand how these 5 skandhas actually causes suffering, we need to spend a bit of time to look into these 5 skandhas. First of all, there is form. What is form? Form is included in the 4 elements, such as solidity, fluidity, heat, and motion, as well as the 6 sense organs, which are your eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, as well as their corresponding objects in the external world, such as visibility, form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind objects. And the second of the 5 skandhas is what we call sensation. These include all of our sensations, such as our sensations that are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And basically, the skandha of sensation includes the experiences which we gain through our physical and mental contact with the external world. And the third skandha is the skandha of perception. Perception also refers to the 6 organs and their corresponding 6 external objects. And perceptions are basically produced through the contact which our 6 sense organs make with the world. And so perceptions are responsible for recognizing objects in the world, be they physical or mental. And now the 4th skandha is what we call activity. These include all volitional activities, including good and bad. In other words, it will be our karma. Basically, volition can be regarded as a type of mental activity which functions to direct the mind in a sphere of good, bad, or neutral activities. And volitional activities include attention, will, determination, energy, desire, hate, ignorance, conceit, idea of self, and so on. And all of these will produce karmic effects. And now the final one is consciousness. Consciousness is also of 6 kinds, and it is based on the 6 sense organs and their response to the 6 corresponding external phenomena. So there is the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mental consciousness. But we need to remember that consciousness is merely aware of the presence of an object. It does not actually recognize it. So when the eye consciousness arises, it is simply aware of a color, but does not recognize that the color is actually blue or red. It's actually perception that does the recognition. In other words, with the presence of these 5 skandhas, as our sense organs contact the physical world, we start to have perceptions. And these ideas are passed into our consciousness. And within this consciousness, people tend to take the false perception of the fact that what is stored within this consciousness is real. Say, for example, you sense something or you touch something which makes you feel very comfortable. So your mind tells yourself that this feeling is comfortable. For example, the sofa is very comfortable because it's soft. Then your mind starts to get attached to that softness. And once you are unable to experience this softness, or you experience something that is less comfortable or harder, then discomfort will rise in you. You will tell yourself, this is not as comfortable as the couch which I had felt before. And because of your false conception of what is actually good or bad, or comfortable or discomfortable, suffering starts to arise in your mind. Therefore, this is what we mean by the 8 final type of the 8 sufferings, which is suffering of the 5 skandhas. Okay, we have just discussed some of the basic ways to understand how the human life is related to suffering. Now we need to look deeper into the subject of suffering by describing the basic causes of suffering. And the first cause of suffering is the fact that the self is not in perfect harmony with the material world. As we must constantly work to find comfort in this world, so sometimes when the world does not provide for our comfort, we start to suffer because of this disharmony. For example, when the weather is too hot or too cold, or that our possessions require constant attention, or that when the house is too big or too small, or that when our shoes wear out, our clothes are too old. We live in a material world which never works the way that we want. And when this happens, when there's no harmony between us and the physical world or the material world, we suffer. And the second cause is when the self is not in perfect harmony with other people. For example, we cannot always be the people whom we want to be with, or that we're forced to spend time with people we can't get along with or dislikes us. So this self not in harmony with other people causes suffering. And thirdly, when the self is not in perfect harmony with the body. For example, the body becomes born, it grows old, it gets sick, and it dies. And the self has very little control over this process. Therefore, we start to suffer. And fourthly, when the self and mind are not in perfect harmony. For example, when our minds race from one idea to the next like a wild horse in the wind, moving so fast, changing all the time. Delusive mental activity arises and becomes the source of all of our suffering. And sometimes even if we do know that this is happening, we still find it very hard to control our minds. When this happens, suffering is caused. And fifthly, when the self and its desires are not in perfect harmony. For example, when desire is produced, or when it arises, it produces karma, or what we call karmic effects to be more specific. And it also produces suffering. And knowing this does not mean that it can be controlled, because self-control is very difficult, as sometimes what we know to be the best for us is not always what we want the most. And if we just let our desires run free, we will just suffer even more. And now the sixth cause is arised when the self and its views are not in good harmony. This basically means when we are affected by wrong views, or that when what we're believing is not in good accordance with the truth, endless troubles will occur, because we just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Now, the seventh cause is when the self is not in perfect harmony with nature. Therefore, when it rains, when there's a flood, when there's a drought or storm or other forces of nature beyond our control, we will start to suffer. Therefore, these are all types of suffering, the causes of sufferings, which can arise in our lives. And so far we've talked about suffering over and over and over again. You may start to wonder why the Buddha continued to talk about the word suffering. Is he trying to be pessimistic? Or is he trying to drive us towards such a same attitude? We have to remember that the Buddha had never denied happiness in life when he taught that there is suffering in life. And that the Buddha taught suffering not to scare us or to make us despair. He is simply trying to help us recognize the realities of life. Therefore, instead of avoiding suffering, the truth of suffering should help us or inspire us to overcome suffering. Therefore, he began by describing the different types of suffering which we feel or experience in this world, And after understanding the first noble truth, which is suffering, then we should naturally want to or have the desire to focus on the second noble truth, which is what actually caused these types of sufferings. So it will be time for us to go on to the second noble truth, which is the cause of suffering. After the Buddha talked about suffering, he then taught us that the origin of all sufferings comes from what we call the three poisons, which are greed, anger, and ignorance. And what people do is they continue to chain themselves to the painful and delusive phenomenal world through their strong attachments to greed, anger, and ignorance. What happens then is suffering. And why do we call them the three poisons? It's because greed, anger, and ignorance poison our physical and mental behavior, and it stops us from seeing the true appearance of this world.